we come on to what is cloud native media. So, what is cloud native media? Do we have any ideas? What do you think? Well, up there's a sky, and then we've got the sun, and down there's I think we could call that a global. What do you think? And then maybe over on the right there's a grass valley. Does a cloud fit in there? I don't know where I'm going with this, by the way. So what's cloud? We're not going to go into that in great detail. We've got a word cloud there with lots of words about what cloud is. Elasticity. I can't even say it. That's too many beers. Elasticity, demand, scaling. Is it other people's hardware? It's a bit more than that, isn't it? It's a software interface to infrastructure, potentially. But I think really, when we talk about what is cloud, we mean these people, don't we? We mean maybe there's a bit of Alibaba and other things depending on where you go in the world, but basically it's Microsoft, Amazon, Google. What's media? Apparently it's a plural of medium. And obviously being a dad, my joke would be, I thought a plural of medium was large. But actually, apparently, we don't need to go into that too much. It's this stuff, isn't it? That's what we talk about when we talk about media, TV and radio. Obviously, newspapers, magazines, all of those things count as media. Music, that's not really what I think most people here are involved with. We're not excluding it, but I think we're really focused on TV and radio for the most part. So my take on what cloud native media is, having done copious amounts of research, is this statement. It's technology architecture that leverages the unique capabilities of cloud computing so they can be dynamic, flexible, scalable, resilient, cost efficient, utopian, all of those things. And maybe it involves some of these things: containers, microservices, serverless, DevOps, continuous delivery. Maybe it doesn't. We're going to talk about that right now. So we're going to talk about this plus that equals what. So I will welcome my guests. So, Jonathan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good introduction, Paul. Hi, everyone. I'm John Hale. I work at Warner Brothers Discovery, and I'm a contribution project engineer. I'm currently leading a research and development project into cloud production and cloud connectivity, and just figuring out how we bring that in-house and how it works the most efficient. And it's great to be here today at a real event, actually seeing faces and talking to people. Not sure what time the bar's going to close tonight, but I think when we generally talk about cloud, it can just go on and on and on. Thank you.
Fabulous.
Great. I'm David LiveWyer. I'm director of director of LiveWyer. We're a cloud native infrastructure company. We work with companies to build out or transition to infrastructure which enables cloud native architectures and patterns. Also been quite a while since our last physical meetup like this, so quite excited to see so many people here today and quite keen to talk. So yeah, quite excited.
I think it was the TechX event that some of you may have been at in Olympia a few weeks ago, where everyone had that sort of vibe of, oh my God, we're actually allowed to meet people in real life and talk in a pub. And so I feel a bit of that tonight, and that's great, and that's fantastic, and it's great to see so many people that obviously we haven't met in real life for so long. So let's get on with the topic. David, what is cloud native?
What's cloud native?
In your world?
I think you've done it. That's one interpretation which you put on the screen earlier on. I suppose through our work, our version of cloud native would be it's a collection of technologies, patterns, processes which enabled companies to take the full advantage of cloud capabilities in their software development and their operations. That's the real gist of it. So in terms of some examples, some of the technologies people use to do that, these are things like Kubernetes, containerization. In terms of patterns that people use, microservice architecture, immutable infrastructure. In terms of processes people follow agile process, they follow GitOps. So it's a collection of all of these things applied. This is why it's a lot of things to a lot of people, because some people see it as one vertical of those. They just see it as this technology, this process, this way, or this technology, this process, this way. Where for me, I think it's a combination of those things. Some layers may not be technology focused, it may be more focused on patterns and processes. But ultimately for me, it boils down to the capacity to change. It's about having applications and infrastructure that can change and adapt and grow and move, as well as applications which can grow, adapt and move and interact. I think that's another big thing about cloud native, is that ability not to silo information, not to silo infrastructure, not to silo these sorts of APIs and architectures and interfaces, and making sure that they are collaborative and open. So this is why a lot of it from an architectural point of view is collaboration, open architecture, lots of interfaces, lots of communication, and that's mirrored in the team space as well. So cloud native for a lot of people is the team aspect. So making sure that their teams are working more collaboratively, there's different types of roles, different types of structures. So yeah, that's the sort of general area that we found working with companies when they're talking about cloud native. That's generally what we find.
So, John, how do you think that applies to the media world, and in particular the sort of things that you've been doing?
I think I'll echo your thoughts, and I think everyone in this room has probably got a different idea to the person next to them on what actually cloud native is. But I think we as an industry broadcast, I think we probably got our own take on what that actually is compared to someone that's developing a website, for instance. I think there's lots of differences there. But I think really what it boils down to is just really having experience to run in cloud and to run as efficiently as you can, rather than just having a box on premise that necessarily doesn't translate too well. And I think it can really cost you a lot of money and a lot of time and effort, and it can prohibit you if you don't think about that from day one.
Okay. And David, do you think there are any sort of real life things that the media industry can apply some of those things you just suggested,
totally.
and how we would embrace that?
I mean, media industry is like our experience working in the media industry, there's huge opportunities when it comes to batch processing, batch jobs, batch workloads, lots of processing, lots of conversions, lots of things happening. The media industry from our take on it is an industry that kind of digitized its process. It didn't come up with it didn't revolutionize it. It kind of digitized it. It moved into a space where you were putting up, like an example is you've got a videotape. A videotape goes from one department, goes to another department, or some sort of physical asset. Now you've got a file going into one folder, which is being run on one server, which is then being spat out into another folder, which is then being picked up and then spat out into another folder. And that works. That's fine. That's good. But it's in some ways it's kind of digitized. So I feel like when it comes to like the cloud native aspects, especially around batch processing, there's huge gains, because now you're looking at it in terms of where is the most efficient place for my workload. In terms of being tied to a cloud provider, tied to a specific area. I've got this type of workload. It's high CPU, or it's high disk, or it's high network. Where's the cheapest place for me to run that? How can I run that workload there? How can I do that effectively? Well, you do that by building abstracts around your workload, by making it flexible, by building the systems that you're building are portable. The processes you're building it can move from one cloud provider to another. You're not tied to one specific system. So there's lots of effort, there's lots of gains there. APIs. I mean, come on, media industry and APIs, that's, it's huge. It's all about interfaces. Customers want to be able to access metadata. They want to be able to access other information. They want to access all of this other information that may have been internal only or hidden within the media industry. Suddenly that stuff needs to be opened out.
So do you think we've got a lot of unlocked potential there with all of that?
I think there's huge amounts of metadata information that can be processed, that can be monetized, that can be distributed to partners. And all of that is data, APIs, and those are challenges that lots of non-media companies are facing and solving and working within the cloud native space.
So do you think the media industry is somewhat behind maybe the big curve of fintech and web startups and all of those people?
I get the sense that some people may see it as an all or nothing, but it's not. It's not an all or nothing. My take on the media industry is that there are certain aspects of how things are run, they're run that way because they have to be run that way. The testing, the resiliency, the effort, the investment to actually get them to run that way is huge. And then so the gains of maybe moving them into over system aren't there. So don't do it.
So John, how do you think this translates into some of the things that you've already been doing at Warner Brothers Discovery, Eurosport, all of those, your bouquet of channels?
I think you mentioned a very good point. I think you said files. I think for files, it's definitely there, and that translates from, tech industries over. Files are very easy to move around, they're very easy to transfer. It's just data. You can have drop packets and then they will just recover it, and it's not live. It's not going to impact the viewer if you have a degradation like that. But I think for live video, it's completely different. You can't have that batch processing. Totally. And the first thing you need to put a server on premise to get the video up to the cloud. And that just doesn't really scale parallel to scaling in cloud. So you suddenly then have huge data centers on premise to keep up with scaling in the cloud. And it becomes very, very difficult to keep up with that and to justify a cloud strategy if you have to maintain an on-premise data center. And some of the things we've been doing to try and kind of do some research and development into this is for the Tokyo Olympics, we stood up a huge network through a cloud provider. And it was taking streams directly from Tokyo all the way to European tech hubs. And it was a serious pipe. It was about 40 gigs worth of traffic. And it's not like low bitrate streams either. These were JPEG 2000, JPEG XS, 170 megabit streams running through this pipe. And it worked brilliantly. I mean, there was packet loss, but we had two networks. One went around one side of the world, the other one went around the other way, and we used -7 to heal the streams. And it worked absolutely brilliantly, and it allowed us to really leverage the connectivity that's available in the cloud. But it's taking the feed from the source and getting it into the cloud. So kind of moving on from that in Beijing, we decided that we wanted to put it into our kind of cloud production development lab. So we were able to take masses of streams from the Tokyo Olympic Games straight up into a cloud, straight into a cloud production environment, and then produce an output. So we bypassed all of our kind of on-premise infrastructure. So to kind of keep up with that, there was no on-premise scaling that we needed to do. It was, to coin a term, natively from the source, straight into the cloud, and then being processed. And traditionally, we would have had to bring that back to Europe over our own WAN links. We'd have to then convert multicast to unicast through gateway devices to send it up to a cloud, which then becomes very prohibitive because then you need to maintain your data center on premise to do that. So I think it's, maybe one term is kind of cloud native connectivity, where you don't need on premise, you just go direct. And
yeah, I suppose it goes back to my original point, which was it's not a catch-all.
Yeah, precisely.
It's not something that you necessarily have to say that all infrastructure has to follow this one pattern. My question would be, the software or the assets that you are developing, which are leading into that, which sounds like a very, quite a well thought out, intricate architectural model. But then there's maybe software layers. There may be other things that you're developing, other capabilities that you're developing on one end, other capabilities you're developing on the other end, which would benefit from being developed potentially within a cloud native model from a development point of view. So, for instance, when we talk about cloud native, it's about how you run the software in production. So it's about having that versatility and agility within production, with failover, all those other things. But it's all about software development. It's about, say, for instance, how do you package up your software? How are you encapsulating your software? A lot of this stuff, the way I explain to a lot of people, is most of the work I do is boxes and circle loops. Boxes and loops. It is, where's the boundaries around the thing? What are the loops that are running inside the thing? So in terms of your workload, in terms of the application that you're running, be it an API server, a batch processing workload, whatever, what's the boundary around that? What's the furthest point you have to go to test that? Some software you can run as a single process. That's easy to test that anyway, test it on your laptop. Other, as soon as it gets more complicated, you've got multiple processes all interacting with each other. some of it's hardware based. So sometimes you can't. Okay, can you generate mock-ups, mock-ends, mock points, these sorts of things around it? And so when you're getting into that sort of cloud native space, it opens up opportunities for you to be able to create that boundary around those applications in a way which you can enable developers to test in isolation. Do integration tests, instead of integration tests being a QA, sort of once a month deal, because they have to get access to that software or this infrastructure, this environment. They have to stand up a bunch of servers to do it. It's something they can do on demand. And so it's not just about running in production, it's about the capabilities that it enables for developers to develop those solutions that run in that sort of more sort of architectural focused environment.
And do you think, maybe Jonathan, do you think multicast is something that cloud providers need to embrace in order for us to do more in the cloud? Or do you think it's more on us to say, to rework our workflows, our way of doing things, that we don't need to use multicast to do these things?
I think it really depends. I think the biggest thing is you need to mirror what you're doing on premise in your cloud data center. And if you can't mirror it, then it creates hurdles. Like if you were going to buy a new on-premise data center, if they said, sorry, you can't have multicast here, you probably would think about going in there, because it would wouldn't gel with your other data centers. But there's ways around that, obviously. And I think about, if you think about it from the start, it might not necessarily become an issue. It's only when you have to integrate it into your legacy networks and how you're moving streams around and legacy workflows. Otherwise, you have to put conversion NAT gateways in to do that conversion process for you.
I guess that's where the scaling problem you mentioned earlier kind of really comes in, doesn't it?
Yeah, precisely.
Because ultimately, converting from multicast to unicast streams to do different things with it is something that you have to then scale on-prem.
Exactly, yeah. And that's the hidden cost, is scaling on-premise to scale a cloud system.
So I guess the message to the cloud providers is we need multicast in order to really leverage that scaling.
I think.
I think we're going to come to that. I think. Should we, let's go for it.
Yeah. To be honest, I just had a question around the general media view on cloud native and whether it's all actually cloud native. I spend most of my life dealing with cloud native tech that isn't in the cloud. So it's essentially private cloud inside mega organizations that have exactly the same kind of challenges around multicast and the rest, with probably much tighter timelines on processing the data and moving from A to Z in the finance world. And a lot of what seems to be coming out in the finance world, in the telecoms world as well, is around, what they call the hybrid cloud, but what I prefer to look upon is just, it's the same tech but in a different place.
Yeah.
It's about separating your software from the hardware.
Exactly.
So that it can work in a flexible and scalable manner. And that way, actually, it doesn't matter where you're running it, you just run your software in the right place rather than running it in a place because you must, because you've architected it this way.
And where it's most cost effective as being one of the reasons why, and that's what we were saying earlier on. It's about, once you start abstracting your workload, again, you get that box you define. This is the box where I have opinions as an application developer, as a team, as a product. This is my product that sits in this box. If the system that sits around that is an interface that is available in public cloud or is available in private cloud, for a lot of people that interface is Kubernetes. For some people that interface is that they can run containers. For other people, typically it used to be that interface was, you got Linux, you got me a Linux kernel, that's the interface I need to be able to deploy this workload here. So it's just, as long as you've got that boundary well defined and you're continuously developing and versioning your product within that boundary, then that's one of the benefits you get, and it is the ability is your product to be portable.
The follow-on, I think, is how much of that is true at the moment? How much of it is we're trying to do cloud native in the AWS, the Azure, the GCP, and how much of it is we're trying to take what all those companies have learnt over there and applying it over here in our own systems instead?
Funnily enough, because we're currently, my company's working on a project that's doing exactly this. And it was born out of on-prem. It was born out of private cloud, and now it's gone into public. So it's private cloud, but it's gone into public cloud because there's opportunities there. Because of the work that we've done to create that abstract within the private cloud, there's now those opportunities for them to be able to say, okay, instead of us investing X, Y, and Z money, we can now do a POC, 6-month POC in this based on public cloud.
And that's what we found. We found that everyone, lots of the stakeholders we're dealing with are convinced that this software can't work in the cloud because it hasn't before.
Yes.
What we're seeing as the techies instead is that, well, you're worried about it and we get that, but let's try it and give it a go because it takes us an hour. And then when you start trying it, you start finding that actually it's a reasonable concern, but not the world's biggest problem.
Yeah.
And actually it's more about what behaviours do you need from the software, what behaviours do you need out of the hardware that control the proximity to the edge and back out again.
And I think it's, sorry, do you want to?
No, please finish.
Sorry, I was going to say, the one, I think there's two sides to that, is that for a lot of companies, they see it as a one-size-fits-all. So they look at certain aspects of it and go, well, we can't do that, so we're not going to do it all.
Yeah.
But that's just not the case. If there's many layers above and below, to the sides, around these more rigid structures, which are there for a reason, that could benefit from it. So that's the first thing. Second thing is these companies don't necessarily, they're not aware of the capabilities that come from doing it that way. So a classic one we had was where we worked with a company for a number of years. We built out this capability. And then a sales rep came in and was like, right, we've got this opportunity for this meeting. I've sent off to the designer to do some mock-ups design for this mobile device, that's mobile screen for this app sort of thing. We're going to go into this meeting in 2 weeks. Whereas the software team said, oh, we'll build it. We'll just build a POC. And there was this was just as we were delivering the infrastructure. So this was based on them having the ability to build a whole new environment like that. They had their services based around APIs. So they weren't building it from scratch. They were just interacting with existing API services. They were just building a couple of other microservices to interact with everything they've already built, present it on the URL that's all secure, that followed all of their internal security policies. They had the time really was just doing a basic app view. They went into the meeting, showed it, sold it, won the deal.
Yeah.
And it's that idea that the business did not appreciate that the agility that these things offered allowed them to suddenly seize these opportunities at that level.
I'm going to hand this back because I'm probably going to carry on.
Apologies. Yeah, me too.
There's a pub later.
Yes.
Does anyone else want to? Does anyone else want to ask something?
I was just going to
Greg?
kind of slightly challenge something.
Okay.
The idea that to make something cloud native, you have to replicate what you're doing in private data centers.
Nope.
And that multicast.
No.
Sorry. And the idea that we need to convince cloud providers to support multicast. That to me sounds like the kind of opposite of cloud native. That's kind of taking what we do now or what we do on prem and making the cloud work for that, rather than looking at the cloud and the opportunities, the public cloud particularly, the opportunities it presents, and redesigning our kind of ecosystems accordingly. Which, I guess I'm just hearing mixed messages, I suppose. Where are we landing?
I can answer that. I think if you're in a bedroom, if you want to launch a channel, I think it's very easy to design your solution from the ground up in the cloud, and that's it. You buy your cameras, you buy all of your infrastructure, and you put it in the cloud because that's where you want to be. But I think broadcasters that have got legacy kit, legacy workflow, legacy services providing to people, they've got all of that down on the ground. And I think that's when it becomes very tricky to put a service that you're providing up into the cloud and then still maintain all of that below.
So does that mean that we'll never really be cloud native in broadcast?
Maybe if you're in a bedroom launching a channel by yourself.
But again, I would say on that point, it doesn't mean that all your infrastructure goes via the cloud, if that makes sense. It means that there's certain aspects that it's not all or nothing. There's certain aspects of what you do don't necessarily need to be what you call cloud native, but all the aspects around it that are. So you would still be a cloud native company because you're applying it to what works for you, what's right for you.
And I think there's benefits that you get. There's probably a tiered benefit model that you get from putting everything in, through putting bits and pieces in and then bringing it back down. And there's still like cost implications there. You know, like if we have to convert every flow from multicast to unicast, that's a server on premise and that's a cost. So that becomes really tricky to scale that. But there's ways around it. If you were designing a system from the start that was a very isolated system for a write that you've got in, that's day one, you could design it slightly differently if you wanted to adopt cloud native from day one, I think.
So is there a bit of the innovator's dilemma in there? Maybe.
Possibly.
Yeah, okay. Maybe one last question for me. By the way, what we really need, I think, given the discussion just had, is a talk about integrating cloud native and legacy.
Yes.
Which as a happy coincidence, is exactly what we've got coming up. So that's a brilliant segue. Now I've forgotten what I was going to ask. I guess the one last thing I was going to ask was, one of the reasons that people want to embrace the cloud is to unlock this agility and this quick time to market and all of those things that apparently you get when you buy cloud. It's on the tin or something. How does that relate to the conversation that we've all just had? Who wants to take that, John? Put you on the spot.
Sorry, I'm thinking.
Or does anyone else have a view on that? It's a noisy room. So unlocking agility and quick time to market by using cloud, is that something that is important, I guess? And how would we go about that, given all the things we just talked about? And it feels like there's a disconnect there, because we talked about all sorts of really difficult sounding things about integrating the cloud with legacy and multicast.
Start small.
Yeah?
I'm sorry. I was going to say start small. Either pick on something which is well understood, something which is going to interact with or has a well-known interface, build that out.
I think
I would say start urgent.
That as well.
It's something that, like, in the pandemic, there were lots of projects that we got involved with that just had to happen.
There you go.
And there was no, they just had to happen. So people were better to say no.
Well, I suppose that's one of the biggest factors that we have, which we haven't discussed this entire time, which is the politics involved.
Yes.
Which is the elephant in the room when we talk about anything to do with cloud native or anything to do with anything to do with cloud like this. It's a big shift for a lot of organisations.
I mean, there's a certain sense, and it's interesting. You guys, certainly John, comes from a very large company with a very large budget, and I had a conversation with the CTO at Discovery 5 years ago at NAB, and he was very uncompromising about the fact that Discovery had gone totally into the cloud and devil take the hindmost. And I had a conversation with him about what that was costing, and ultimately what it boiled down to was Discovery's still in business, so that's okay, and I can spin up a Linux server in half an hour now, whereas before it used to take me 9.5 weeks from specification to delivery.
Exactly.
And that's quite difficult to kind of calculate for, but it's a big part of being cloud native. If you're cloud native and you can have an idea in the morning and have it running in the afternoon and realise it doesn't work by tea time, that production cycle, you can kind of innovate at a much higher rate, I imagine.
But for some organisations, for some stacks, for some setups, getting to that point requires a huge amount of effort. It requires not just a rejig of the technology, it requires a rejig of the structures of the organisation itself, of the support functions. It does. Like for some companies, they...
Which is why I said having a panic is a great place to start.
It is.
No one's going to say no.
Because it just cuts through. Yeah. So sometimes, having that sort of, like I say, panic, that cuts through the politics. Sometimes, obviously, having the sponsor, having someone who understands or believes in, I should say, what those capabilities are, and is able to then, manage that side of it whilst you're delivering. But the key thing here is you've got to deliver. You've got to deliver. And I think this is why I meant deliver small. You've got to be showing these incremental gains. You've got to be showing the capabilities quickly, not over time. It can't be wait 3 years, and once we get to the end of this 3 years road, then you'll start seeing some benefits of what this is. You have to start small and start showing how those processes improve performance, like velocity, development, work throughput, lower error rates, improve, and actually start seeing the smaller gains. Because a large part of this is building trust. You're asking people who have worked in industries for many, many years, decades, who know what they're doing within that context that they're working, and you're asking these people to change. You can't just ask them to change and say, because I said so. You have to show them the golden path to why, and you have to build trust. And so starting small, building out these projects, working with these teams. Some people want to separate the team, want to create a separate team. Like you say, like where you're just cutting through. That can work. So you can get some gains just to show that process works. Other companies, that's the last thing you want to do, because you've instantly put them and us. You've instantly created a separate unit which is now getting all the glory, all of this and all of that, and it's a terrible thing. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It's very much dependent upon the structure of the company and the structures of the team you're dealing with. And sometimes you have to change the structures of the team.
But isn't there a large challenge, which is, I'll shout. A larger challenge is that a large portion of a lot of these organisations don't understand what cloud native is and what it means. I remember being on a call with somebody quite high up in a large national broadcaster. They were talking to a cloud native ma'am and asked, how long will it take to digitise my content? And the answer was, how much money have you got? Because we're built on serverless infrastructure, we're running on Fargate. Give me the money, I'll digitise it in half an hour. And the executive just flat out didn't believe that. He said, that's bollocks, that can't be true. So there's a fundamental lack of knowledge about what cloud was. And so one of the challenges is large portions of the management structures in lots of companies are not cloud native. No,
I suppose it is a man. So there's aspects to this which are technical, but there are aspects of this which are political, and there are aspects of this which is just team management, of being, and like when you start moving into these sorts of areas where you are essentially you're getting into a place where you are enabling change. You are saying that we embrace the ability to change. We want to constantly modify components. The idea of having this system that's a utility in certain areas. Other areas, obviously, certain utilities are a utility for a reason. They do that one job, they do it well. But other things like APIs, batch processing, other things around it are constantly changing, taking on new features, taking on new improvements, but other things such as this isn't working, how are we going to fix this bug fixes, these sorts of things. It's constantly changing. You've got people working in ways in which they are just developing streams of work. They have a roadmap, they know what they're developing, you just want them to work. There's other people who are working in a more enabling capacity, where they're going in and they're fixing, they're resolving, they're troubleshooting. A lot of people are doing both those jobs today. And there's no understanding from a management or any other side that they do both those jobs. That one day they put one hat on, 1 hour they put the other hat on, then they put their hat on back again, and they're expected to constantly jump between these streams. There is no appreciation for how much overhead that generates on an individual working in this space with the ramp up, the ramp off of trying to deal with these technical problems. So this is one of the things where these are some of the benefits for the teams. It's like, right, this is part of the trust. It's like, fine, I understand you don't fully embrace this technology, you don't feel it's going to do the things that you feel it's going to do, but what we're going to do that is we're going to recognize how you work, and we're going to try and improve it. We're not just trying to improve the abilities of the infrastructure overall, we're trying to improve the situation for the people dealing with this infrastructure as part of this project.
So it's all about what's in it for me. For all the participants involved.
Ultimately, I'd say everyone benefits, but it's that idea of looking at it and using it as the context to make improvements on that level as well.
I'm just conscious that we are over time, but
Sorry.
I just wanted to say, is there any last question or last comment that we have from anyone before we move on?
Just wanted to say, I think the most benefit is speed. Right, it's just being able to do things quickly, and that translates to not having endless meetings after meeting after meeting to decide how we're going to launch a new service.
Amen to that.
Right, and it's just, you can have an idea, you can just say, well, just go build it, see if it works, and then it either works or it crashes and burns, and then you learn something, and then you know how to do it properly the next time. And it's just speed is the main benefit. That's it from me. Thanks a lot.
So key takeaways, David?
I think the high level, which is the capacity to change, is a massive thing, both on the technology, the infrastructure, and the people being able to process change, and how, you know, and ultimately building interfaces so the things that we build are able to be interacted with.
Okay. So it feels like cloud native media is more than just doing some video in the cloud. It's about the entire organisation and about how everything interconnects. Yeah. Wow. That's now really big and scary. But you said start small, so let's start small.
Yeah.
So brilliant. Thank you so much for coming and joining us this evening, and I think it's been an interesting discussion.